So I'm Peg. I'm just going to show you how I do some processes for warping my loom, which I always do alone, and hope that some of the things that I do will be helpful to you. If they're not, that's okay too. I have a standard Maycumber 8 harness, and I'm going to show you what I do. I start with I always warp back to front because that's how I learned, for no other reason than that. I have a homemade rattle. I think it's a piece of ash with finishing nails drilled in every inch. And I'm going to show you how I use one of my favorite non-weaving tools, which my son introduced me to. They are Irwin Quick Grip clamps, and they adjust very easily. You can probably grip anywhere from 1/2 inch to, I think, a foot. So I set my rattle on my back beam, and with a few squeezes, I put a clamp at each end to hold the rattle in place. Then I take the ever popular broccoli rubber bands, and I put one on each end, and just wrap each rubber band a few times around the end of the rod to hold that apron in place while I warp. From there, I think I have a pretty unusual setup for my lee sticks. I've never seen anyone else do this. I don't know how I got this idea, but it's what I do. At each end of my warp, at each end of my loom, I have a loop of Texsolve with, the Texsolve pegs, and this is what I use to hold my lee sticks. I never tie my lee sticks to the front or the back of the loom. They rest in these loops, and I can, with the pegs, I can adjust the loops to be higher or lower as it suits me. I used to adjust them quite frequently. Now I just leave them in one place. And you'll see that my lee sticks are not made of wood. These are 1/2 inch thick-walled PVC pipes, and they are perfectly smooth, and even the stickiest warp threads never catches on these plastic lee sticks. I've used them and these Texsolve loops for years and just love them and wouldn't go back to anything else. So my warps, I have 2 bouts of warps, and I will put them through my lee sticks, and I have a tip that I developed that works for me. You may not need it. You may have something else that works for you. My ties that go around my cross, I always use blue on 1/2 of the cross. In this case, it's the upper, and some other color tie on the bottom half of the cross. So when I come to my loom, I always know that the blue side is up. And the reason that I do that is because I have done any number of mistakes. So, you do all your careful planning before you start, and then you get to the loom and you put the second bout on upside down, and you're wound on the back beam before you realize, oh, that's not the order I wanted my colors in. And at that point, you're really sort of screwed. So I started because I did that not once but twice, I always put blue ties on the top of my warp, and that way they're always going on the loom in the order that I want them to be in. I'm just getting another rubber band. Another thing that I do that I think is different than lots of people, I don't tie my leaf sticks together. I use a rubber band for that. Another broccoli rubber band. So I put it around one of the leaf sticks, the bottom one, I twist it, I put it through the top, I twist it again, and I go over both of them. It's totally secure. I have a rubber band on each end. My warp is never going to fall off of my leaf sticks. At that point, I can take, I don't know what this rod is called. It probably has an official weaving name. It's a wooden dowel. And I will tie this dowel onto my apron dowel. And that's what will hold my warp in place after I spread it in the rattle. You want these ties to be just slightly wider than your finished warp will be, than the width of your warp. If you put them too far out, you will bend your dowel. If you put them too far in, you won't be able to spread your warp the way you want to. I also always put my middle tie, I hang it over the leaf stick or the rattle before I start, because I've forgotten to do that as well. And if you forget, it really bends your dowel as you're beaming. The next thing that has to happen is spreading the warp in the rattle. I don't know that there's an easy or quick way to do that, so I'm not going to bore you with me spreading the warp in the rattle. That's what I'm going to do now. All right, so I have my warp spread in my rattle. I have my two big hair rubber bands. I don't use broccoli rubber bands for this part. On the top of my rattle to hold those threads down, I have my 3 ties holding my, I don't know, I guess I'll call it warping rod to the apron rod. And I'll show you what I do next. I take off those broccoli rubber bands from the apron rod, and then using my Irwin quick clamps, I release that rattle and I flip it to the front of that back beam and clamp it back on. And I do this for 2 reasons. Because my rattle is homemade, the edges of it are not bevels, they're not rounded. And because it's a hardwood, those edges can be sharp. So if I was using a soft warp, whether that was maybe a fine silk or something like alpaca, the edge with that rattle up here, the edge of that, sharp edge of that rattle can be hard on the warp. Also, with the rattle facing the back, these rubber bands are never stressed. I never have to worry about my warp popping off of the leaf sticks, off of the rattle. And here again, you'll see that my leaf sticks can move up and down freely. This is 8-2 unmercerized cotton that I will be using to make towels.